Let's make some sourdough together. Here is my starter, which is super active and ready to bake with. I fed it last night. So first I'm going to add 100 grams of the sourdough starter to a bowl, along with 350 grams of warm filtered water. Give it a little mixy mix here.
Holy fuck, buddy. Can you get down, please? There's nothing for you up there. There's nothing for you up there.
Evan's been really into climbing on top of the cabinets lately. Back to the recipe. So I'll add 2 teaspoons of salt. I use kosher salt here. And then we are going to add 500 grams of white all-purpose bread flour. I go right in and mix it up with my hands. I find that's the best way to mix the sourdough. Once that's well mixed, you're going to cover it with some plastic wrap and set it on the counter to hang out ferment for about 3 hours. I'm having just a nice afternoon here at home, so I made myself a cup of tea from my tea advent calendar. I haven't bought an advent calendar in years, so this was a really fun way to do an advent calendar. The tea that we had today was a ginseng matcha green tea, which was actually pretty good. I've loved all the teas in this collection so far. Once my tea was ready, I sat down to do a little bit of work on my computer, and the time really just flew by. Before I knew it, it was time to get supper ready and time to get back to the sourdough, which I honestly forgot about until a friend reminded me. 3 hours are up. It's time to do a series of stretch and folds. So I'm just doing 8 stretch and folds here, and then I will cover it back up and let it hang out on the counter for another 45 minutes to ferment a little bit farther before we do 2 rounds of coil folds, and that should be about it before we jump into shaping. I was doing a little bit of research here on my computer for recipes. I've been playing around with making an in-corn flour sourdough bread. I made one a couple weeks ago and it didn't turn out too bad, but it called for a lot of flour. So I've been trying to find a new recipe that uses a little bit less flour. This one I used, I think, called for like 900 grams of flour for 1 loaf, which is double what I would typically put in a white loaf. This in-corn flour is a little bit of a better type of flour, and it is a whole grain. So I'd like to master that and maybe switch over to making exclusively in-corn sourdough. But I still really like the white loaves, and they always turn out really nice, and they've come together really easily for me. While I was waiting for the bread to be ready to do some coil folds, I just started to get supper together. So tonight we were just having a chicken stir fry with some peppers, mushrooms, onions, and then a little bit of rice. Super basic, super simple, and pretty quick. I'm kind of off chicken lately. I'm much into red meat instead, but we have a bunch of chicken breasts that need to be used up, so that is what we're having tonight. Back to the sourdough, it's now time to do some coil folds. So I'm going to do 8 coil folds. So coil folds, you just pick them up in the middle, pick the loaf up in the middle, let the ends fall over, and then you just kind of wrap it over itself. And you spin the bowl 90 degrees. Yeah, 90 degrees as you do it. So you're going to do a total of 8 of these folds. Once 8 are done, you'll cover it back up with some plastic wrap and let it set for 20 minutes. I did that whole song and dance one more time before we moved on to the phase that you see here, which is pre-shaping the dough. You'll turn the dough out onto a well-floured surface. You can set the bowl aside, you don't need that anymore. And what you're going to do is you're just going to start to roll it into a bit of a ball, tucking the ends over itself, as you can see what I'm doing here. So you're just kind of making a bit of a ball. You're starting to drag it down the counter a little bit. Really, you should be working from one corner of the counter all the way down diagonally, tucking as you go along, but I kind of do it this improvised way that you see here. I just find that my method prevents it from ripping. So that's how I do it. Then you will let the dough set for another 20 minutes before we go back and we'll do our final shaping and laminating. So what we just did was called pre-shaping and needs to rest for at least 20 minutes before we do our lamination and final shaping. While the dough was resting, I whipped together some quick power balls. These are my favorite little grab and go snack. They've got sunflower butter in them, flaxseed, cranberries, cocoa powder, a little bit of honey and oats. They're really good. I can include the recipe in the description here if you're interested. We are at our final work step with the sourdough. So we are going to do our laminate. So basically you're going to be stretching out the dough without ripping it if you can. This helps to develop the gluten in it. So I'm just gently stretching it a little bit. You see I pick it up and I kind of do like a, I don't know, like a pizza dough making action. Kneading? I don't know what this term is called. But I'm doing this with the dough to stretch it out. You can see it's kind of getting a little bit bigger, and then I put it back on the counter and stretch it a little bit more. And I repeat that process until I am happy with what I've done, basically without ripping it. So you have to be careful. And then I fold it over itself in thirds and roll it into a ball, and we do our final shaping here. So like we did previously, you're just tucking the ends under and you're rolling it into a ball, trying to be careful not to rip the dough, adding more flour down as you need. If you do rip the dough, not the end of the world. I actually rip the dough a little bit here. I just, work around it. It seems to be fine. I don't think it really impacts how it bakes up. Once the dough is shaped, you're going to place it into your floured banneton or bowl. So you can just take a regular bowl, put down a cloth towel, and spread some flour. So this prevents it from sticking to the cloth or to the bowl. And then once that's done, you're going to cover it with plastic wrap and set it someplace warm to rise for, I did about 2 hours, I found gave me enough rise. You want about a 50% rise. Then you could either bake it right away or you could put it in the fridge overnight to further ferment. Putting it in the fridge overnight helps it develop a bit more of a sour flavor, which I prefer. So now it is the next morning and it is time to bake the sourdough. You're going to preheat your oven to 495 degrees Fahrenheit and stick your Dutch oven or cookie sheet, if you're cooking it on that, in the oven to warm up with the oven. Once the oven is ready to go, you will take the sourdough out of the fridge, put it on a piece of parchment paper, and you're going to score it. So one big slice on a 45-degree angle is usually sufficient. If you want to get fancy, you can also draw some leaves or some trees or whatever your little heart desires. Then you are going to take the Dutch oven, if you're using it, out of the oven and put the sourdough in the Dutch oven, put the lid back on it, and stick it in the oven to bake at 495 for 25 minutes. If you're just baking on a cookie sheet, the process of getting the dough ready is the same. You will just instead put the sourdough on the cookie sheet. Obviously, it's not going to be covered, and that's okay. Bake it the same. If you're using the baking sheet, just pay a bit of a closer eye to it as it's cooking because you don't want to accidentally burn it. But either way, if you're using the Dutch oven or the baking sheet, you're actually going to take an additional baking sheet and put it underneath the cooking rack, and that will help dissipate some of the heat. So you'll see that I do that here. I just stick a baking sheet underneath the Dutch oven. Once the 25 minutes are up, you are going to take the lid off the Dutch oven, if you're using a Dutch oven, and turn the heat down to 395 and bake for an additional 20 or 25 minutes. I think I did an extra 25 minutes here just to get the crust a little bit crispier. I also accidentally turned off the oven, which is fine. If you're just baking on a regular baking sheet, just turn the temp down and set a new timer for 20 to 25 minutes. Okay, it gets ready. Oh, that looks good. And there you have it, a loaf of sourdough bread. Thanks for following along. I can't wait to see what you make.